Let's talk about academic research and the types of sources you're going to use to make your research paper rock solid. There are two types of sources in academic research: primary sources and secondary sources. Here's how you tell the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. Primary source is a body of work that's original, a novel, a painting, letters and diaries written by a historical figure. So even if you're researching, let's say, a historical figure, somebody that's passed on, Teddy Roosevelt or Martin Luther King, you can't talk to that person, but you can read things that they wrote. So that would be considered a primary source. An essay by a philosopher or a writer, photographs of a historical event, videos of a historical event, government documents about a new policy, court papers, music recordings, original YouTube videos, results of a poll or some type of research, some empirical study. So those are primary sources. They're typically the things that we gain new knowledge from by studying the letters of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Jr., you might discover some idea he had that hasn't yet been written about. So that's a primary source where you're looking at a piece of art. It could be a painting, a photograph, a novel, a poem, or you're looking at a figure in history through something that they themselves wrote or they themselves said in an interview. And by looking at these pieces, you are deriving new information, new ideas. You're coming up with a new theory, all right? You're going to use secondary sources to support and get evidence to bolster your theory and give it credence, to give it the weight that you think it should have. A secondary source is an article or a review that analyzes a novel. It could be a documentary about Martin Luther King Jr. It could be a book, a biography of his life. It could be a textbook talking about some philosopher's essay that they've written. So a secondary source interprets a primary source. So what you're looking at are two different kinds of sources. The primary source is the original body of work that you are looking at to gain new insight and create new ideas. A secondary source is a source that interprets a primary source, which you'll read to either get evidence to support your ideas or so that you can get into conversation in your essay, in your research paper, with other writers who've already written about this primary source. By getting into that conversation, you are showing your reader that you know your stuff. You've read a huge body of work about this, and now you can form a position. Often, as you are doing your research, as you read secondary sources, they may contribute new ways of you thinking about the primary source that you yourself are analyzing, and you may find new ideas begin to emerge and bubble up simply through the act of researching. In fact, that's the point of doing research, is so that you bring into your own world other people's ideas and then use your lens, your experience, looking at a primary source with secondary sources now playing a part in your analysis. And that's how you build an interesting view on a primary source. Each research paper you write will have a primary source. And you should have at least two, if not three or four, secondary sources that you have combed through and gained ideas from. And you will use evidence to build whatever idea it is that you are contributing now to this discussion of the primary source. All right? The other role that primary sources play in your paper is to give authoritative information about your topic. By looking at the original or by listening to words that the person that you're studying or the author that you're studying said, you will have authoritative information. Secondary sources, you can gather evidence and background information. It will support or contrast your own arguments. But the actual analysis that you're doing is on the primary source. I hope that's helpful, and have a great time finding all of your sources.